Have you ever just sat at your desk and wondered, why is my job set up this way? Why do I have a boss? Why are there departments? Well, it turns out the way your workplace is structured isn't an accident. You're actually living inside a 150-year-long conversation about the best way to get things done. Today, we're going to pull back that curtain on the hidden history of management, and trust me, you might be surprised by what we find.
But let's start with a really basic question. Why do we even have managers? I mean, this whole layer of bosses and supervisors, it feels so completely normal to us now, right? But believe it or not, for most of human history, it just wasn't a thing. So, where did it all come from?
Yeah, for centuries, management was pretty informal. Think of a master craftsman and their apprentice. The master knows the whole process, and the apprentice learns by doing. Simple. But then, boom, the Industrial Revolution hits. All of a sudden, you've got these massive factories with thousands of people, complex machinery, all stuffed under one roof. The old casual learn-as-you-go approach, it completely fell apart in all that chaos.
So the first big attempt to fix this mess was to treat management not as some kind of art, but as a hard science. The thinking was, let's approach this whole thing like an engineering problem, one that we can solve and optimize for absolute maximum efficiency. Okay, so try to picture a steel plant in the late 1800s. It is loud, it's dangerous, and it is totally chaotic. Well, a guy named Frederick Taylor walks into this scene and sees two massive problems. First, the workers were intentionally working slowly to protect their jobs, a practice he called soldiering. And second, the managers, they had literally no idea how the work was actually being done. The entire system was basically built on mutual distrust. Taylor's solution was, for the time, pretty radical. He basically said, let's stop all the guesswork, let's get out our stopwatches, let's observe every single movement, break down every task, and find the one best way to do it. And he gave it a name, scientific management. He laid it out in 4 core principles. First, figure out the science of the work. Second, pick the right people and train them scientifically. Third, cooperate to make sure it all gets done the right way. But it's that 4th principle that was the real game changer, dividing the work. For the very first time, the thinking and planning became management's job, and the doing became the worker's job. That was a huge shift that we still absolutely feel today.
And boy, did Taylor's ideas leave a mark. On one hand, he gave us the foundation for things like process improvement and measuring efficiency. But on the other hand, the criticism was fierce. It was seen as dehumanizing, treating people like nothing more than cogs in a giant industrial machine. And as you can imagine, that sparked some serious resistance from workers and their unions.
Now, Taylor wasn't the only one on this quest for order. Over in France, you had Henri Fayol, who was mapping out what he saw as the 5 key functions of any manager: planning, organizing, and so on. And at the same time in Germany, Max Weber was arguing that the most rational and efficient structure of all was a bureaucracy, with its clear rules and hierarchies. But see the common thread? All of them were searching for order and predictability. But here's the thing about trying to make everything a perfect, predictable machine. People aren't machine parts. This intense focus on pure efficiency created a massive blind spot, the human element. And a really strange discovery at a factory near Chicago was about to change the history of management forever.
So the story goes, it all happened at the Hawthorne factory. Researchers were there to study how the level of lighting affected worker productivity. So they turned the lights up and sure enough, productivity went up. Awesome. But then to be sure, they turned the lights back down and productivity went up again. They must have been totally baffled. What on earth was going on here?
Well, it turns out it had absolutely nothing to do with the lights. It was all about the people. Productivity was rising simply because someone was paying attention to the workers. They felt seen, they felt like they mattered. This was a huge revelation, that social factors, group dynamics, friendships, feeling part of a team, were often way more powerful motivators than the physical conditions of the job.
This discovery lit the spark for a totally new way of thinking called the human relations movement. One of its early pioneers, a brilliant thinker named Mary Parker Follett, put it perfectly. She said real power isn't power over people, it's power with them. It's about collaboration, not coercion. I mean, what a direct challenge to Taylor's top-down, command-and-control world.
All right, so now we've got 2 big, competing camps. You've got the cold, efficient machine model, and you've got the warm, collaborative, human model. But the real world is messy, right? And it didn't take long for people to figure out that neither approach was a silver bullet.
This realization pushed us into the next major phase in how we think about management.
And this was the big breakthrough. The whole quest for a single, universal solution, that one best way that Taylor was obsessed with, was actually a dead end. The most effective way to manage isn't a one-size-fits-all formula. It all depends on the specific situation.
This new era was really defined by two powerful ideas. The first one is systems thinking. This is all about seeing a company not as a bunch of separate departments in their own little silos, but as a living, breathing, interconnected system. If you make a change over in marketing, you better believe it's going to have an impact on sales and engineering. You can't just tinker with one part in isolation and not expect ripples everywhere else.
And that leads us right to the second big idea, contingency theory. It's a simple but profound thought. The best structure for your organization depends on its environment. A really rigid, hierarchical, top-down structure, that might be perfect for a huge, stable car manufacturer. But try to use that same structure for a tech startup in a crazy, fast-changing market, it would be a total disaster. They need to be flexible, nimble, and adaptive. It all depends on the context.
Okay, so we have just blasted through about 150 years of history. That's great, but what does any of this actually mean for you today in the workplace you're in right now? Let's connect the dots.
So let's just do a quick recap of the journey. We started with this total obsession with efficiency. From there, we moved to these big, grand theories of structure. That in turn sparked the human reaction, and finally, we landed in this more nuanced, it depends, world of systems and contingency thinking. You see the pattern? Each new idea was really a reaction to the one that came before it.
So what should you take away from all this? I think it boils down to three key things. First, be super skeptical of anyone, any business guru, any new trend that claims to have the one best way to manage. Always test ideas in your own unique context. Second, find that crucial balance between the machine and the human. Drive for efficiency for sure, but never ever forget you're working with people. And third, always try to think in systems. Before you make a decision, think about the ripple effects. And that brings us right back to today, because this history, it isn't over, not by a long shot. We are living in the middle of the next chapter right now. So the final question I'll leave you with is this. In a world being totally reshaped by AI, by global remote teams, and by just relentless change, what do you think the next great management idea is going to be?